Hello, and welcome to this webinar, Plants, Puddles and Possibility, the Importance of Natural Play for Children, which is brought to you by the TCPA with support from Sport England. My name's Julia Thrift, and I'm the Director of Healthier Placemaking at the TCPA, and I'm your chair for the next hour and a half. For those of you who don't know the TCPA, can I have the next slide, please? The TCPA's vision is for homes, places, and communities in which everyone can thrive. Next slide, please. The TCPA has a long history of campaigning for places that have a lot of what is now called green infrastructure, the trees, gardens, parks, and other green features that provide multiple different benefits for people and society. We'd run something called the Green Infrastructure Partnership, which is an informal network of people and organisations that work to support the creation and maintenance and protection of high quality green infrastructure in the UK. It's free to join, and if you're interested, we'd really encourage you to join. You can go to the website gipartnership.org.uk and sign up for free, and you'll receive our newsletter 10 times a year. Next slide, please. The TCPA also has a very long history of campaigning for places that support children's needs and rights, including the right to play. So today we're delighted to bring together these two agendas to learn more about the benefits of what might be called natural play, playing in and with natural landscape features rather than manufactured play equipment. Natural play isn't a new thing. It is quite obviously what kids did before playgrounds and play equipment were invented. But in this country, interest in it has waxed and waned. There was a lot of interest in it about 20 years ago, but since then it's really dropped off many agendas. And for many policymakers, the default thinking is that children play when they're outside in playgrounds and formal play spaces. Next slide, please. So today we want to challenge this assumption and to start a new conversation about why it's so important that all children have the opportunity to play in natural environments and how planners, designers and councils could make this happen. We won't have all the answers, but I hope that we can start a really productive conversation to stimulate new thinking about the importance of children playing in natural spaces and how we can all work to make this happen. We've got four fantastic speakers. I'm not going to read out the agenda because you can all see it in front of you. And I'll introduce the speakers just before they speak. And at the end, I hope there'll be time for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, will you please put them in the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And you're welcome to use the chat for general conversation. Although, as I say that, I realise I can't see the Q&A box, which is worrying me. If you don't have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, you can use the chat function instead. So do post your questions as you think of them. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. William Bird from Intelligent Health. William is passionate about getting people active. As a family GP in the 1990s, he pioneered the concept of social prescribing by setting up the first health walk scheme. He's now a global authority on health and activity and an advisor to the World Health Organization. And in 2010, he set up Intelligent Health, an organisation that has an amazing track record of helping getting people active, particularly using its neighbourhood-wide game, Beat the Street. So with great pleasure, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, Dr. William Bird. Welcome, William.
Julia, thank you so much indeed. And it's a real pleasure. And I'm so pleased that we've managed to get this agenda out there. And it's getting more and more, I think, exciting now that we're starting to see people understanding the benefits of why it's so important, not just to get children outdoors, but to get children connected back to nature. So in the 15 minutes I've got, I just really want to go through some of the science because I think it's important to understand that not only is this a concept which kind of people feel inherently is right, but actually there's some really good evidence now that's coming through to show how important. So let's just start with the reason of why is it that nature is important. Well, let's look at the problems that children are having at the moment. No need to kind of tell you that obesity remains a problem. And if you look here at the chart of how obesity levels in year 6 have continued to rise after a bit of a fall from the COVID peak, it's continuing to rise. That level has carried on since 2010 and well beforehand. So we have got a problem there, but we've also got the big mental health problem. Again, you can see just in the last 4 years how number of children accessing mental health services is going up and up and up. And I have to say the two are connected. But also, some older research, but still big problem is that some of these conditions of multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, type 1 diabetes, asthma, and many allergies, and here the allergies going up, are just causing more and more problems. And one has to question what is going on here? What's happening? We've got probably the most healthiest kind of possibilities that we can ever possibly have, and yet we're creating more children with more diseases than possibly ever before. Loads of progress, obviously, and I wouldn't want to say about infant mortality and the horrible diseases that used to be there, but we're seeing this new rise. And that's why I think, although I can't put this all onto nature disconnection, but there is definitely some evidence to show that children being indoors a lot of the time, and obviously with social media, we know, is causing a problem. So let's go back to some very early research back in the 1980s and 90s when Professor Strachan from St George's Hospital put in the hygiene hypothesis. And his first thing was to actually realize that children who are the eldest had loads more allergies than the children who are the youngest. And it's continued ever since. With nurseries, it's slightly flattened it, but it's still there. And what he realized, as of a lot of research, that actually children who are the eldest don't have as many connections with bugs and bacteria and viruses than the youngest child that tends to have everything brought into the house from their older siblings. And they came up with a concept that we needed our old friends. Now, these aren't kind of, college friends or people from school. These are bacteria, fungi, and viruses that actually work with our immune system in order to regulate it. And they're divided into 3 groups: the human microbiome, which we know about in the gut, but also on the skin and elsewhere. These old infections, H. pylori is one of them, and there are also other virus infections we get. And then probably really importantly for this talk is the environmental sacrifice, stuff you get in the soil, the leaves, nature, animals, all the connections that you have. And the theory was from this, the hygiene hypothesis, that actually these were all absolutely fundamental to developing a child who's going to have a regulated immune system. And if we see, we've got the picture already of a muddy hand, this is absolutely the most healthy child in the world. The child that's out there in mud and picking it up and probably putting it in his mouth as well. And for some parents, it's horrifying. For others, actually, they get it. Clearly, there are some elements of you don't want to do it right at the beginning of a park where their dog's probably been. But in general, there are lots of gut bacteria out there that we need. Very quickly here, these are the other areas you can get this bacteria from: vaginal birth, from breastfeeding, all those early family contacts like we saw, from the gut, environmental, being outdoors, animals. No child who has been brought up with pigs has ever had asthma. I can't believe it's entirely true, but that certainly was a statement from some researchers looking at this. And then there's some virus infections. So the last kind of environmental and animal is what we're going to be talking about. And if a child has got a really healthy bacteria, and the gut microbiome is a good way of measuring it, then that affects the stress axis from childhood to adulthood. In other words, in our brain, we have a gut talking to the brain. The bacteria in our gut, which is obviously connected a lot with what's coming in from nature, not just our diet. But if that is actually really healthy, then what tends to happen is that as the vagus nerve talks to the brain and we get other immune things like cytokines and everything, it moderates the kind of trigger happy stress response. So instead of someone jumping and being anxious about lots of things, that whole access of when you get adrenaline and get anxious and worried is moderated. And that reduces chronic anxiety, that increases resilience of a child. So we now know that actually getting bugs into the right place into a child will help them in the future be less anxious. And this has been done with huge amounts of research, which I've got 2 papers down there. And as you can see, these are 2006 and 2009. So loads more research has been done since then to actually understand it. So the problem is that if children have weak resilience, in other words, it doesn't take much to create an anxiety and worry and concern, part of the brain called the amygdala does that, then acute stresses, which are actually normal and fine, goes into this chronic stress, and that then creates lots of stress hormones. And in that stress hormones, you've got cortisol, which makes obesity. It demotivates physical activity because it's all about protection of calories as a hunter-gatherer. So the more stressed you are, the more you're going to want to eat. The more you lay down that as fat, and the less you're likely to want to exercise, because the brain, through different parts of the hypothalamus, is saying, I'm in stress, I've got to conserve calories at all costs. So I don't want to be active, and I want to eat lots of things, and I keep that fat as much as possible. So no wonder that in the chronic stress, that you start to get the obesity problems, you start to get the anxiety problems, you start to get other problems of inactivity. The brain is telling those children to do that. And that resilience is geared up by how much that acute stress goes to chronic stress. And now we know that the gut and the bacteria and other things do that. And if we look at that pathway, and it all goes from weak resilience to chronic stress to negative emotions, that changes our behaviors to become less active and eat the wrong things. That causes other problems. It goes both ways. And I'm not going to, in 15 minutes, I'm definitely not going to go through this, but nature has impact and research on every single one of these pathways, parts of the pathway, to make sure that you don't go from that weak resilience down to dementia, diabetes, heart disease, because it breaks it. Every part, nature is moderating it. So we know that if there have been trees and vegetation, but stress and depression, when you've adjusted for all that deprivation and everything else, that still has an impact on depression and stress. So what happens if you go for a walk in nature? Well, studies from Berlin recently, and these were students they used, but we know it can affect children in the same way, that after 60 minutes, the amygdala, which I mentioned earlier, is the bit that actually does the stressy part of making you feel really kind of worried and anxious and sets off the adrenaline, really important, actually shrinks down after 60 minutes if you've gone into nature, as opposed to if you've been in an urban walk. And that shrinking down means that the blood supply and the oxygen levels in there have dropped down. So it's been less used. If you've got a hyper amygdala action, you're constantly jumpy, you're looking around all the time, you're worried, you're anxious, you're on alert. But look what nature does, it drops it right down. And that's after just 60 minutes. So you imagine children every single day, constantly during their lifetime of a child, having an urban environment with no nature, their amygdala is going to grow much bigger than the one child who's been in nature. And the hippocampus, which does learning and regulation of the stress hormones, that also goes up after nature, whereas in an urban walk, it goes down. So these are 60 minutes. So this is almost like doing a kind of workout in a way, So your muscles might get a bit back. I mean, of course, it will drop down again because you don't do it. But if you keep doing it, you exercise your brain to change the shape of your brain. The amygdala gets smaller, hippocampus gets bigger. And in a developing child, that all happens rapidly in the ages of when they're smaller, all the way through to when they become teens. There's also the part in the brain that's constantly worrying about things, which is a very good thing if you've all making sure you're worrying about the important things, that actually that blood flow goes down when you've been in nature. So again, that worry all the time, that rumination is a problem. And even before the child is born, we know that birth weight is healthier if mothers adjusted for everything else live within 500 meters of green space. And big European studies are coming up with similar things on blood pressure and other aspects. We've talked about the hippocampus in that study, but we also know that children, when they've been scanned, those who've been having a much more nature-based upbringing have larger hippocampuses. Brilliant for learning, brilliant for behavior, and brilliant for regulating your anxiety and worries. And even right down to the cellular level, down into the chromosomes, you've got these telomeres, which are ends of the chromosome that, to be honest, if they're long, you're likely to live a long, healthy life. And if they're very short, you're likely to live a less long life, a shorter life, and have less and more diseases as well. So the telomeres, again, won't go into the detail, but we know that children who've spent time in public green space have longer telomeres at the chromosomal level, which is going to set them up for the future of living a much healthier life, again, without those diseases and without that premature aging. So you can see here how it's really going. And of course, it's not just all about the science there. It's about vitality, happiness, purpose of life, all the great things to bring up children, how important it is. So Julia mentioned about intelligent health. We've been working on a kind of health creation matrix here to try and capture these benefits. And you can see how you can divide the safe and valued and belong, which are fundamentals of people, purpose, and place. And you can fill it all in. And then we put questions, and then we put those questions to people on the beat street. And we can come down to areas here where in Spencer Road, in Ipswich, here in that area there is very low nature connection and a lot of inactivity and obesity. So it's a deprived area. This nature connection helps us to understand where we can be focusing our attention. And interesting, when you look at the Health Creation Index, you see these parts of Ipswich are very low, Westgate, Gipping and Stoke Park. You superimpose adult inactivity, and it kind of mixes. You superimpose children's inactivity, and it completely goes over. Parents who have got low health creation are nervous and worried. They don't go out, therefore the children can't go out as well. So it's how this whole dynamic of, if we've got to get the parents also to go out, not just assume the children, but it's also about making a place safe, making it feel included, making a place feel that there are other people that are like them who are out there. And if we looked at life satisfaction, it doesn't work. It's not. So that's the normal life satisfaction that one tends to use. So we can get more children out and beat the street to nature because we're making it fun and we're giving them an incentive. And we can even look at areas where nature connection in different mapping in a part of the South Reading is very, very low, low nature connection on the right-hand side. And you've got the difference where nature's well apart, which is in the South Reading part. So you've got, the high nature connection in the north and the low nature connection in the south. Therefore, that helps direct you. Here are the barriers. We've heard them all before, but just remember the online computer and phone is actually quite low down. It's schoolwork, parents who are really busy, unable to take them out, and places not adapted for young people or don't feel they can go. So we've got a lot here we need to help understand. you don't just build the green space, but we've now got to activate it for children to help families go out. And this is in Salford. And you can see here that if we increase green space, the areas that would really benefit are the lighter green and yellow, because some of them already got it. And by looking at the work, you can see how mental health, this one's physical activity will increase hugely. So again, we can target where we should be going by the people there, but also by nature deficit. But it doesn't mean you put nature everywhere, because if you've got a limited budget, we have to focus on where we go. So there is a hugely important aspect of nature in our system, which may well be one of the reasons why we're getting all those problems. We need to understand how important it is children are there, but we also need to make sure that to activate these places, we need to understand how the parents are finding nature, how we can make nature far more accessible. And also, if we're going to create more green spaces, let's target them on the areas where there's going to be a real benefit. Thanks very much indeed. And thank you, Julia, for inviting me to do this talk.
William, thank you so much. It's really good to start with evidence. And I think we're all well aware of the increased rates of anxiety and problems that children and young people entering adulthood are having. And it just makes you, it's just so important to get that evidence out there. So thank you very much. I hope you can stay for questions at the end.
Indeed.
Great. So we're now going to move on to our next speaker. If you have any questions for William or for the other speakers as they present their thinking, do put the questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take the questions at the end. So our next speakers are Andree Davies and Adam White of Davies White Landscape Architects. Andree is a fellow of the Landscape Institute, a plantswoman and a landscape architect with more than 35 years' experience. She designs therapeutic, playful and biodiverse landscapes that connect people with nature. And Adam is a fellow and past president of the Landscape Institute and is a leading advocate of the nature play movement. As Davies White Landscape Architects, Adam and Andree have more than 2 decades' experience of designing nature play landscapes. So I'm delighted to welcome them. And over to you, Andree and Adam.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen now. So there we go. Just let me go to the other one and it will appear by magic. There we go. Okay, Julia, can you see that now? Is everybody seeing that shared screen?
Yes, I can see that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you for inviting us today. What Andree and I are going to do is kind of 3 little parts to this. We're going to talk a little bit about the principles behind designing nature play spaces. Then we're going to look at a couple of our case study projects. And then we're going to look at something we're really passionate about, and that's playful planting. And we'll take any questions on any of those subjects. So so at Davies White, Andree and I create playful, inclusive, biodiverse, sustainable landscapes and gardens. We worked for the environmental charity Groundwork for a decade before we set Davies White up in 2008. And all our projects aren't quite as muddy as that one. So we'll give you a bit of an insight. So these are the cornerstones of Davies White. If you've not got these books, we'd strongly advise you to download them, purchase them, or get the audibles. Richard Louv talks about nature deficit disorder. It's not a medical condition. It probably should be. He followed that on with vitamin N. N is for nature. And that was ideas about how you can get outdoors. And then a friend of ours, Florence Williams, wrote The Nature Fix. It's one of our favorite books. Can nature make us happier, healthier, and more creative? And these couple of pages from it, we think are probably the most important. So this is called the Nature Pyramid. And it talks about how you can get the benefits of nature, and you need to get the doses of them, the sort of daily fix. And that might just be a plant on the windowsill. It might just be growing cress and mustard with your children in a Tupperware. The weekly fix, that's going to a local pocket park, and then monthly exploring a little bit further. And then a year, every other year, getting immersed in wilderness. Now, to get the benefits, you need to experience each of these, not just one of them. So really important. And this isn't new. We've just heard about it. This really isn't new. Florence Nightingale said post-operative patients recovered twice as fast when they had a view of nature or green space. She said patients would roll over like sunflowers turning to the light when they were given a window out into the countryside. And then in 1979, the architect Roger Ulrich couldn't work out why he took the longer route driving home. And his wife asked him, why didn't you use the motorway? Why didn't you use the fast route? And he did for a while, and he felt a bit angsty. He just didn't feel relaxed. And he realized the longer route, he was surrounded by nature. So he did a lot of research into it. And it's actually Roger Ulrich is the reason why if you go to the doctors or the dentists, you see a picture of a leaf or a tree on the wall, it brings the heart rate down. So a little exercise for you all watching. We'll do it really quickly. Have a look at this image from Surrey Wildlife Trust. What can you see? Have a look in this. What can you see that's living? For me, what really jumps out is the tawny owl on the left, because I grew up looking after injured birds with my dad. There's a badger there, there's a butterfly, there's a bee, there's insects there. Now, that's what most people spot. What they don't stop and think is, what about the trees, the plants, and those rare little characters, the fungi? And this is what's known as plant blindness, where in society we stop and look at the things we can relate to that are maybe living on the same time frame as us. And what we need to do is realize it's the ecosystem that we need to care for, and that includes the plants, trees, and fungi. And this book is a wonderful book. It's not been out very long, and it's about the little child that walks to school with the dad. He doesn't spot nature on the doorstep, and the child does, and you can see he's just picked a couple of little flowers there. It's a smashing book if you're trying to explain to people what plant blindness is. Now, I'm delighted to say this is not one of our projects, and even these springy chickens have had enough and they're about to jump in that lake. But what it does enable us to do is talk about what is play, and that's really important because it's so easy to think about fixed play equipment. So when we talk about play, we're thinking of fun, adventure, excitement, but people often overlook this, which is competitiveness, danger, risk, fear, even bullying. Now, you need to experience these in childhood because you'll have a heck of a shock when you get to adulthood. But what we try and do is turn them into positives. So you can remove bullying waiting to get on something by adding two of them. So you can introduce positive competitiveness. Now, before we even design a space, before we even think of equipment and the features or the plants, we think about the types of play. Now, that little QR code there will take you to a page on our website where we talk about this in a little bit more detail. But it's getting everybody to think about what is play. And the two things that always jump out for us is there's social play, where there's interaction, and there's quiet play, that opportunity to sit and calmly play. So it's a really useful slide, this, and something I encourage you to take a screenshot of or visit the page and have a look. Now, we were on the editorial panel for this publication. It's still available. It's over 10 years old, but it's a really useful set of design principles. And we'd encourage funders, clients to use this as the brief, to use this as the benchmark when you're thinking of designing or creating a nature play space, because it stops you leaning towards all that fixed play equipment and starts you thinking about what's important when it comes to childhood. And these are the two supporting documents: managing risk in play. Although one time you want risk in play, a risk in life is in play because you need to learn how to manage it. And then this is the follow-on, the third one, which is called the maintenance guide, which anybody that's got to be the custodian is really important. Now, you might have seen this slide before. It just shows you over the past 120 years how the right to roam for children has got smaller and smaller and smaller, to the back garden and now even to the bedroom, and how important it is to provide the opportunity to get outdoors and play. Now, this was published last year. It's brand new. And it's and Julia mentioned at the start, there was a real movement 10, 15, 20 years ago to get kids outdoors, and it's kind of petered away. So it's been rebooted last year. And again, we can send you a copy if you want to have a look at it. And it's encouraging the government to put play and nature play first again, which they'd stopped doing. And this is a good example. Always look good in grayscale, don't they? These are brand new housing development projects, brand new. And that's the play offer that goes in. Whereas we believe this is the play offer that should go in. It increases the biodiversity value, it increases the play value, but it also increases the property value. So there you go. There's the before, there's the after, exactly the same place, using a landscape-led approach. Again, here's another project we did. So these are our day jobs. We work with an organization called Pippa. If you've not seen them, go on the internet and Google them, and they will do an audit of your play space. to tell you how inclusive and accessible it is. And that's what we're about trying to do, is make it inclusive and accessible for all and all age ranges. And we do that through end user engagement, involving them in the process. So it fosters ownership, so important. Analog making models, but recently we've embraced the digital technology. So they don't have to put the smartphone down. They can slot it into a homemade VR goggle box and then be immersed in the design. And that's how you foster ownership and respect for that green space. And there you go. This is the garden that we've just been talking about. This was a garden for children with autism. We worked with Caldwell Children near Keele University. Now, just a couple of case studies before we look at the juicy, fantastic, playful plants. So Earlsfield Primary School, this is Southwest London. And we did the same workshops as we've just shown you there. We got the children to map how they arrived at school, how they used the space at break time and when they left. And that really helped inform the design for this, what was an ocean of tarmac, and turn it into this playful nature garden at the school. One of the children came back and they visited the Eden Project and said, would love one of those domes. The teachers laughed and went, yeah, right. But actually, that's what we did. We created this mini Eden dome, which is where the children are cultivating and growing cuttings for their playful planting scheme and planting it up themselves. And then for older children, this is a secondary school project. We're on site at the moment. We're in planning at the moment. And it's a microforest. It's a woodland that's going to wrap around part of the new build. So the idea is not to just have the greenwashing aesthetic, but to have a design that creates classrooms, learning spaces, and quiet spaces for the staff and the teachers to go and use during break times. And it's very much bringing the landscape right up to the boundary of the wall of the building and within the building as well. And there's the mood board that we created, the images that we created to show what it will look like when it's delivered. And it wouldn't be a Davies White presentation without just tipping our cap to the RHS Back to Nature Garden project that we worked on in 2018 and 2019. We co-designed this project with Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. It was all about getting children back outdoors, playing and immersed in nature. And we created a garden at Chelsea and Hampton Court shows, and then 2 permanent ones, one down in Devon and the other in Surrey. And she brought her family along. We had a group of children came along. It appeared in lots of press and media, which was wonderful, about celebrating the importance of nature, even in Hello and OK. Well, I say that, they photoshopped me out of the picture. Can you believe that? And Andree's got the most famous head of back shot. So after that project finished, we then went back to our day job, which is working on these sort of play spaces and turn them into nature play spaces. Now, I just want you to look at the building on the right there, because you're going to see that in a moment. There you go. So you can see it's the same space. So it's a landscape-led approach to creating these spaces. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to hand over to Andree, and we're going to work through how we create these playful planting schemes and some takeaways that you guys could introduce at home, in your garden, in a community pocket park, or at school. So we'll just go through some of the great plants that we use on our project. So I'll hand over to you, Andree.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think one of the really important differences with the way we work when we're designing playgrounds is we fill them with plants. So we talk about this term nature play. So for us, nature means plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, flowering plants. And we love to get as many plants as we can into our play spaces. And that might sound like an easy thing to do, but it's quite a challenge because we work with a lot of public sector clients who are nervous about how we're going to look after these plants in the playgrounds. So as landscape architects, we do a lot of planting design, but over the last 10 years, we've really been developing a palette of plants that have appropriate qualities to make them suitable for children. Now, what we wanted to do is find these kind of ways into plants for children that make them interesting and able to recognize different plants and their qualities. So some of these images you're seeing at the moment are the species that we have selected and we use a lot. So they have resilience because, of course, if you're working with children, things get trampled on, they pick flowers, they sit on them, but those are all things that we encourage. So it's important that we have selected plants that can withstand that kind of environment. So we look very carefully for texture and leaf shape and qualities that children might recognize. So the Regerzia in this image, for example, has qualities of dinosaurs and Jurassic big leaves. And that was one of the things that we put into the Back to Nature garden when we did that at the Chelsea Flower Show. Not all of them are these small perennials, thinking about trees and timber and making dens. This is all using plants. We either grow new trees, and willow particularly is a really good thing to plant on site because it's got so many applications for children to be able to do craft projects. We've worked with a lot of artists who do work with willow for us, and you can see in this image how big those plants get after a while. This was at the end of lockdown when it hadn't been woven back in very regularly, but you can see that the drama of planting in playgrounds is very impactful. So hazel, there's another tree we use a lot, along with weeping trees like a weeping beech tree, so that kids can get underneath the canopy and really enjoy getting to know plants. And as Adam says, we do a lot of engagement with families and communities. And one of the ways we thought about getting into plants is to get children to start feeling comfortable touching them and smelling them. So we've selected plants that we could weave little stories around. So for example, this alchemilla, after a rain shower, the rain sits on top of these hairy leaves. So we started talking about fairies and leaving fairy dust and diamonds on plants. So these are all ways that help children get into understanding plants and get excited about them. And also things that are familiar to children, like cola bottles. There are plants, there's a pelargonium called cola bottles. It's got this particular combination of scents in the leaves, if you rub them, that are familiar to children. And they recognize those as these chewy sweets cola bottles. Including plants that are edible is part of what we do. We're quite careful to locate edible plants in one particular place so that children can understand that in that area there are edible plants, but there are not edible plants everywhere. So this is a way of helping children understand what they can and can't eat. But these tiny strawberries are so juicy and tasty that they are really, really popular. And again, really robust, vigorous plant. The Cicidophyllum japonica in the autumn smells of candy floss. So it's got compounds in its leaves that when it gets really cold and it starts to lose its leaves in the autumn, you get this burnt sugar smell coming from the tree. So those are the sorts of things that we've been considering over the years and trying to bring this planting mix that are really playful and child-friendly. And if you ask children when we're doing our scent and taste workshops to smell something like mint, their everyday experience of that smell, like toothpaste or chewy sweets, are the sorts of things that it reminds them of. But what it does is help them understand that plants are there to interact with, and they have got qualities that they perhaps haven't considered before, like being edible and smelling of all these wonderful things. This is one of Adam's favorites, a good plant that you rub on your muscles if you've got sore muscles. So, we try and introduce all of these broad spectrum of what plants can do and what they are and how we see them all around us. And that's one of our attempts to overcome this plant blindness and a kind of bias towards the built environment and away from planting design.
This, Andree, was really interesting, wasn't it? So wintergreen is that, if you've been to the rugby or the football and you smell that muscle rub that goes on, it smells a bit like germaline as well. But the Egyptians would crush these berries because it numbs the muscle a little bit. They put it on the camels to numb their muscles before they put all the heavy load on. So it's quite interesting when we do our research into playful planting, and you get these stories that go back many years, how so many of the qualities of plants were used in everyday cooking and health and well-being. It's quite amazing. But sound is a really good one, isn't it, Andree? Kinetics and music as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So all sorts of seeds and seed pods we use. We're thinking about the shape of the plants, the sound it makes. the colours, what it looks like through all of the seasons as well, because that's a really important part of making these places interesting, accessible all year round. We're also careful, of course, to choose carefully to make sure we're not including anything that is toxic or has large thorns. And that's, how we have started to refine these plants that we use over the years.
So yeah, so just to finish off, this is kind of one of the great quotes from Sir David. We were lucky to work with him and spend some time with him, and he shared this quote with us, and it kind of finishes off our presentation, that if children don't understand nature, they won't appreciate it. If they don't appreciate it, they won't protect it, and if they don't protect it, who will? So there you go. That's our little presentation that hopefully gives you an insight. You can visit our website where there's lots of these projects expanded and a lot of our research. We've created a section called Field Notes, where it's like a learning hub where we can share our lessons from the past 30 years of designing these fantastic nature play spaces. But we'd like to hand you back, and we'll hang around for any questions going forwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andree and Adam. That's just completely inspiring, and compared with some of the awful, off-the-shelf, unimaginative playgrounds that are sometimes added to new developments, it just shows what can be achieved. So thank you. We're now going to move on to our final speaker, who is Adele Adams. Adele is a landscape architect and project lead. She's currently working on a £3 million initiative to enhance the use of outdoor green spaces for little ones and their families in Bradford. Now, unfortunately, we seem to have a problem with Adele's sound, and she's unable to. She's listening, but we can't manage to get her microphone to work. So we've tried all sorts of different things, and I do apologise for that. But I think Adele's presentation is going to be read out from notes by my colleague Gemma Hyde. So we apologise for anything that isn't quite right on this, and hope you can just bear with us. But we look forward to seeing the fantastic images. So over to Adele and possibly Gemma as well.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Hopefully you can hear me. Adele, as Julia said, is on the call. So if you have questions for her, hopefully she'll be able to answer them in the question and answer box, or we can certainly facilitate answering them after the webinar and getting responses back to people. So I'm going to do my absolute best here to do this justice for Adele. I'll also point out that on our website, the TCPA's website, we also have a case study of this project as well. So between us, we'll sort of get the point across. Adele is a chartered landscape architect and a project manager for Better Place Bradford, and she's been working with and for communities, supporting what happens in green spaces close to where people live, work and play. So Better Place has been funded through the National Lottery Community Fund under the umbrella of the Better Start Bradford programme, which is definitely worth a look if you're interested in finding out more about that, and sort of loads and loads of evidence and great learning around children who've come through that programme. Next slide, please. So why is outdoor play important? So children are spending so much time sitting in a box, looking at boxes, and they are not moving as much as they should. And they just don't have the opportunity to be bored. So they have this sort of constant drip feed of dopamine from screen use and little influence to direct what they do in their own time. And you can see here some quotes from different people who have things to say on this, including Dr. William Bird, who's on the call. But essentially, it's echoing everything that has been said already about our children not moving as much as they really need to be for their health, physical health, but also for their well-being, and how much the natural environment is so important in moving us away from the situation we've got ourselves into. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of play? So play is one of the most crucial elements in child development, and limiting it can have lasting consequences. So outdoor play is essential for children's cognitive, emotional and physical growth, and it forms the foundations of all other areas of development and learning. Self-led play in particular is not only a developmental necessity, but also a powerful therapeutic tool that supports children's confidence, self-esteem and mental well-being. So there's all these interactive things that come through play, and they don't act individually either, they build on each other. So through outdoor hands-on experiences, children develop problem-solving skills, creativity and resilience, while building a deeper connection with the world around them. Early playful experiences in natural environments is a stimulus for every other stage of development, including everything from emotional regulation, grace in movement to social skills. Next slide, please. So quality outdoor spaces bring communities to life. There are all these positive impacts of play in natural and outdoor spaces. And when neighbours have great places to play and be active, people naturally come together. And when that happens, children thrive, neighbours connect, and the real sense of community and citizenship starts to grow. So these places make it easier, more enjoyable for everyone to move more. Along the way, they spark social interaction and shared pro-social habits and contribute to places having their own unique character. Next slide, please. And outdoor play offers restoration for everyone. It's a chance to meet and reset and feel well. And being active outdoors stimulates our senses and builds essential motor skills that support balance, strength and coordination. And that's true across the age ranges. So over time, these benefits add up, better health outcomes, reduced health inequalities and lower rates of illness, and longer, healthier lives. And stronger communities also see less antisocial behaviour and fewer incidents of crime. So investing in quality outdoor spaces is an investment in healthier people, safer neighbourhoods, flourishing communities, and little ones' futures. And you can see some of those positive impacts outlined there. Next slide, please. So in Better Place Bradford, what have they been doing so far? Next slide, please. So essentially, it's about helping families to be playful, enjoy time together, and build mental wellness and give little ones the happiest and healthiest start in life. So the aim is to encourage people, especially those with very young children and expectant parents and families, to spend time being playful together outdoors. And all of the project's outcomes are geared towards that. Next slide, please. And the golden thread through the methodology of what Better Place Bradford's been up to is about co-designing with the community. So there's these two elements that form the work that they do. One is around this capital improvements and installation of playful spaces, but the other is through this engagement process, more than a process, an engagement foundation. So it is about co-design and community activation and participation. So yeah, it is about installing bespoke capital improvements, especially around play provision, but then also engagement activities that demonstrate lots of different ways that new spaces can be used and also looked after. Next slide, please. So by working closely with parents, they've sought to remove barriers and create outdoor playful spaces that truly reflect local needs and aspirations, listening to communities and valuing the voice of the child. So Better Place invests not just in places, but in people. So through co-design, guided by the community, creating cherished spaces that build pride, ownership and long-term healthy neighbourhoods. And you can see how the strands sort of work together there. Next slide, please. So children and families faced different and multiple barriers to getting outdoors to play, and Better Place is seeking to work those out with the community and overcome them. So many caregivers can only travel short distances with very young children, making access to safe, welcoming spaces close to home absolutely essential. Neglected sites that have limited maintenance and where resources have not been invested over time, or which have poor access or poor inclusivity, can discourage people and create concerns about crime, antisocial behaviour, and feelings of safety and confidence, even if you want to use those spaces. So there are all these different things, and certainly risk and fear of injury has also come out already in this discussion so far. So there can be sort of multiple personal and cultural barriers that prevent involvement in being outside and in using spaces, especially close to home. Next slide, please. So Better Place has sought to sort of overcome these challenges by putting families and children at the heart of what they do. Co-designing playful spaces and listening to the voices of children means that they can ensure spaces meet real local needs through smart investment, good design, and sustainable maintenance approaches that make the most of limited resources, and making sure that places feel safe as well as are as safe as possible, that sites don't look neglected or uncared for, and that we have honest conversations around fear and risk of injury. So accessibility and inclusivity are built in from the start so that children and caregivers of all abilities, cultures, and backgrounds feel confident using spaces. So the way to sort of think about some of these things that has come out through the project is around perceptions of safety. So actually clear site signage, having clear sight lines and thoughtful layouts, and thinking about how the exits work. Putting videos on social media about how to locate sites and how to get to them, and what to expect when you get there. Ensuring that places are busier, because busier places feel safer to people, and a community presence helps improve perceptions and discourages antisocial behaviour. There have been offered sort of clear engagement sessions that promote contact details of session leaders and links to community champions, and a urban ranger, which is a familiar face in a uniform that is around, not necessarily a persistent presence, but is around and is recognised by the community. And also forging links with existing community assets and groups, so friends of groups and local community organisations who will be interested in what's going on and this new sort of asset for the community. And then also a buddy system for new parents who are looking to explore these places and want to go there, but maybe feel a bit unsure about that first visit. In terms of stopping sites looking uncared for, having strong relationships with site owners, the urban ranger, making regular maintenance visits, especially just before any engagement sessions, mechanisms for reporting damage or fly tipping so that rectification can happen quickly and sites looked cared for, and then education around litter dropping and antisocial behaviour and what to do if those things are seen. And then around fear and risk of injury, designing and building to industry standards such as the BS-EN 1176, which hopefully means something to some people on the call. Carrying out ROSPA inspections, again, we could clarify what those are, weekly check-ins and maintenance, and then also encouraging parents to support little ones to gauge their own capabilities and have courage in risk-taking. Next slide, please. So if we make outdoor play easy and convenient, play on the way, parklets, and reduce the need for travel, we can just build confidence through simple, low-risk doorstep and play opportunities, which fosters a sense of ownership and encourages care, pride, and long-term community use. Next slide, please. This is an example from Horton Park and Horton Primary Field, and there are just specific examples here of projects that Better Place have done. I don't particularly have notes on these, so I'm just going to go through these slides. Next slide, please. So this is one where they've obviously had a theme around under the sea, and they've created these places and some beautiful spring planting. Next slide, please. And this is about making things feel special for each community. And when that's done, then that means that people feel more ownership over it. Next slide, please. So a few things that Better Place seek to build into their schemes. One is around swales that collect and evaporate water, hills to think about sledging when we get some snow and rolling down, things like splash puddles that dry out so water doesn't become stagnant, often double slides so that little ones can play with parents and siblings, planting for seasonal and sensory interest, and dynamic features, meaning a play area can often something different at every visit. It's not boring. There are some examples that Adele mentions around the 3 bears beds and hammocks so that little ones can look up at the tree canopy and watch the clouds drift by or stars at night, and incorporated dens for role play, building social skills, determination, assessing risk and imagination. It's also important to involve things like loose parts play. So props, not safe, non-toxic and developmentally appropriate things. Obviously being aware of things like choking risks for infants, young children and children with unique developmental needs. But loose parts should be large enough to prevent choking hazards is an important point. And designing a site to include things that can be cropped. So dogwood, contorted hazel, birch and willow, as Adam and Andree mentioned, or to bring items along if a session is being run. So pebbles, sand, feathers, yogurt pots, jump ropes, scarves, costume jewellery, bamboo poles and tyre inner tubes. So there are not many of the schemes that don't have a sandpit or a mud kitchen. So trying to encourage children to really get sensory involvement through that way. And incorporating open-ended play into sessions. So children can decide how materials are used and what play becomes and when it changes. Next slide, please. So open-ended play is really important, and it can adapt to every child's needs, supporting different ages and abilities and interests, and strengthening social skills such as cooperation, empathy, working as a team for a common goal, and encouraging independence and confidence in in children trusting in their own choices and testing their capabilities. Next slide, please. So when done well, play invites conversation and storytelling and negotiation and new vocabulary, which helps to develop language and communication. And it helps with this exploration of the world, which is just what children do. That's what they're doing all the time, exploring and observing everything around us. Next slide, please. So that's again looking at some of the props and play that have also been introduced into schemes. Next slide, please. And getting dirty and muddy is a part of it, and helping parents negotiate that or plan ahead is important as well. And also having the right sort of clothing. Next slide, please. Which I think is what this is about. So yeah, not letting the weather dampen spirits. So making sure that parents have an understanding of what being dressed appropriately looks like, and helping families think through where they might source things. So buying secondhand wellies, for example, is a huge way of supporting children who grow out of wellies like you wouldn't believe. If you've got children yourself, that will be familiar. But essentially, helping an understanding of what's appropriate, and therefore making sure that weather doesn't get in the way of play, and inspiring children to use places all through the seasons. Next slide, please. So in summary, it's about, for Better Place, it's about working with communities, building trusted relationships and a willingness to become and stay involved. Next slide, please. And the golden thread is engagement, and it is about that engagement alongside physical improvements. It's not enough just to do the physical improvement and expect that that's going to be the answer. It is about building in maintenance at the very beginning of a project to ensure longevity. It's something we have to think about, and it's really important to try and think about the resourcing of roles like the urban ranger, in terms of looking after places, but also how to build volunteering opportunities and community ownership so that spaces remain safe, attractive and used. And the benefits of quality playful spaces close to where people live stretch way further than having fun together. The impacts are far-reaching in terms of child development, health and well-being. Next slide, please. There we go. This is Adele's contact details. And like I say, if there are questions that come up for Adele, then we can certainly try and answer them in the question and answer box or forward them on. And we will also post a link to the case study about Better Place on our website as well.
Adele, thank you very much for putting together that presentation. I'm really sorry that you weren't able to present it yourself, but I would like to thank Gemma very much for making that very, very interesting and fluent based on notes that you only saw a few minutes ago. So thank you both. Adele, would you like to answer questions in the Q&A box? Because then you could type in your thoughts or responses, because we really do want to hear from you. So I'll leave that up to you. And meanwhile, I'll put some questions to those speakers who can speak. But if all of our speakers would like to put their cameras back on, that would be great. And we've now got a few minutes for questions. So perhaps, Sally, could you remove the Q&A slide? Thank you very much. Great. So, William, I'd like to start with some questions for you, or a question. And this is about this distinction between urban and rural. And you talked about some research that shows the difference between people's or children's responses to urban areas and green countryside areas. Can you tell us, how green does a place have to be useful? And if somebody's managing an urban area, what do they have to do to really make a difference to children's well-being? Because they can't turn it into the countryside. What are we talking about here?
So the urban rural study was simply that they did look at the rural areas. So that's how the study kind of came, and they adjusted. Again, they always have to adjust for lots of things to make sure you're not dealing with people who are more affluent and living in a nicer leafy area. So they do all that stuff. But all the research has pointed towards you can actually just get a tree in a place, and that makes a huge difference. And as Adam said about the Roger Ulrich, that was looking out onto a view, and you don't have to even be in there. So there's a lot that you can create from a very small amount. Any connection needs to be there. So it doesn't have to be hugely biodiverse. It doesn't, but of course you have gradation. So one tree is not going to be quite as much as a small group of trees, and where there's areas of exploring, and obviously we know about that exploration and going around corners and finding new little rooms of green space and having that variety, all add and add and add and add. But yes, rural areas actually can often be even more difficult because their access is worse. So actually urban areas with a really good green space, like we've just heard, is as good, if not sometimes better, than a rural area.
Thank you very much. And some of you might have heard of the 330-300 idea, which is that everyone should be able to see 3 trees from their house or their room. And I'm going to struggle to remember the 30 and the 300, but it's worth looking up because it's a good rule of thumb. I'd like now to ask Adam and Andree and Adele if you'd like to contribute by typing something for us. This is a question about maintenance. Councils, as we know, have very little money for park services, landscape services, maintenance. So sometimes it can be possible to get some capital funding to install something at the outset. But the real problem is the ongoing maintenance and how much that's going to cost. And the government is also very concerned about the burden of ongoing maintenance in new developments. So I just wonder if you've got any answers to how the councils that you're working with or the places that you're working with are managing to fund the ongoing maintenance of green, interesting, plant-filled places. I don't know. Adam, would you like to take that?
So maintenance is a thing that comes up time and time again. We like to use the word aftercare. So just before even talking about budgets, if you just frame it differently and think of it more as a legacy, that maintenance suggests, oh, flipping heck, I've got to maintain it. Oh, you know, it's that chore. Whereas aftercare or establishment is more what it's about. And with landscape, you know, it's about a space that's evolving. If you think back to Capability Brown and the phenomenal brown landscapes at Blenheim Palace and places like that, he never saw the landscape he had the vision for. And I think that's what we've got to think about when we're doing nature play spaces, is it's for future generations, and the establishment and evolution of them so important. And also with landscape, you've got 4 spaces in one, so each season it will be different as opposed to a fixed play equipment space. And I think if you want to look at a great case study, is Freiburg in southern Germany. Their approach to public realm spaces is very different, and the danger we have is we've done a couple of show gardens and people see this polished, wonderful green landscape. You know, children don't mind some dead plants and broken branches and dirty puddles everywhere, so you don't have to have this perfectly managed landscape. And the other thing around maintenance is it's a different approach. So if you were sweeping, we're suggesting you might rake. So if you had sand instead of the rubber bouncy stuff, you're going to be raking it rather than sweeping it. And I think the Play England Nature Play Maintenance Guide document, PDF, is like a myth buster. It really helps everybody figure out how to challenge those skeptics that say it's not possible. Because on a similar maintenance budget to a regular playground, even less in some cases, you can have a playful landscape. So
Wow.
the great thing
That's
is now is
encouraging.
there's a body of case study projects in the UK. Some of them are ours, some of them are other people's. Whereas 15, 20 years ago, the common thing we were told was, yeah, you can do that in Scandinavia or in Germany. You can't do that in the UK. Well, we have examples in the UK that prove it, don't we, Andree?
Absolutely. I mean, I was just going to add that we are working with a housing developer at the moment, and they are offering playgrounds as part of the development. And actually, one of the things they're doing is putting together an ongoing financial package as part of the development of how the green spaces are going to be looked after. And that's being scrutinised through the planning process as well. So we are working with them, not just to design these playful places and nature playgrounds, but we're working with another team who are in place and will be for the next 10 or 20 years to make sure the legacy is protected and that there is a financial package going forward for them to be looked after, because it's absolutely critical, and it's a sort of huge issue across the landscape industry that needs addressing for sure.
Julia, in the Q&A, there were a couple of people mentioned around housing developments, and you know, it's a big thing at the moment. How do we make sure that if those developments have to happen, how can they be a landscape-led approach? How can the play provision that's offered not be a KFC, kit, fence, carpet, springy chicken thing? And part of it is a carrot, part of it's a stick. We think the stick is required. It needs to be a planning regulation that when the developer's putting forward a submission, that they're scrutinised on the offer of access to green spaces and nature play, because they can't all be trusted to have that moral compass of going, let's make a difference, let's do it right. So it needs to be a little bit of both. And we're lucky we're working with 2 clients at the moment on, and it's a bit of a shift for us at Davies White to be working with these developers. But we've gone, do you know what? We've got to step into this and try and create some best practice case study projects to show it's possible. Because if they're not there, people will find a zillion reasons why we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great to hear that that's going on and that you'll be publicising those case studies.
Absolutely.
Really
We'd love to
important.
share more with you going forwards about those projects. Yeah.
Great, great. A colleague from Trees for Cities has very helpfully posted in the chat about the 330-300. So everyone should be able to see 3 trees from their home or from their window, and there should be 30% canopy cover, so that's tree canopy cover, and people should live within 300 metres of green space. So a really useful rule of thumb, which would help all of us, including kids. I'd like to ask you all about sort of cultural issues, because some of this is about finance and who's going to pay for the looking after of the space. But a lot of this does seem to require a cultural shift. And I wonder, William, if I could start with you about the the perception that dirt is bad. So we all grow up, we have to wash our hands, we have to keep clean. We're told that dirt is bad and being clean is good. And talking, your presentation challenged that quite significantly. Now, obviously, some sort of dirt is bad, and some sort of microbes are bad, and some are good. What do we need to be talking about to parents to help them navigate that sort of slightly tricky cultural minefield?
It is difficult because there are times when you do need to wash your hands, like COVID. You have to make sure that we're doing everything to stop it. And in hospitals, if someone's got an infection, so we've been pushing at it as an important part of healthcare, and it really works in hospitals. It's probably saved more lives than in most other interventions. So it's really hard then to change it. And I think the best way to do it is to show that there's a whole lot of goodness out there in nature, and you need to access that to your child, and your child needs to connect with it. And that goodness won't just, can't be from a car window. They've got to get in there. If they're just messing around, picking leaves up and picking them up and then touching their face, they're going to start to get those biomes coming in. They're going to start to get it. So they don't have to get the mud and the real thing. Just being outdoors gives you a huge amount of access. And I think that's what we should sort of start with. And then not to worry if they get mud on their, in their side, because that is again, but an okay thing. But it's almost like I was on call last night, and the parents saying, "Oh, I'm really worried. My child's had 3 infections this year." And I said, "Well, you should be celebrating that, because these infections train the immune system. Children need to have challenges to their immune system a whole time. So even if they do pick something up which is infectious, they're unlikely to be very kind of ill with it, and that will actually again help the immune system. So it's this whole fact of we have to grow up. The nature is helping regulate our immune system, and we cannot do it ourselves. Our body has not got any design to do it ourselves. So that's what I'm trying to get across. But we have to do that. Most of the problems we get with parents, and just to finish off on that, is actually safety. And I think it's come up already in some of the questions and certainly the talks, is the perception of safety. We know things are probably safer than they've been for a long time, but that perception of not being safe, and it's very real, and it's inherent in the parent's anxiety about wanting to be close to their child. So I think that is the other issue. We have to accept that we can't just give them facts. We have to make a place, going into a park, a really great safe experience for the parent and the child, where there's lots of other people there and there are events, and we're activating that park rather than just expecting people to go in on their own accord. I think there are 2 different perceptions we have to challenge.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think that comes back to the point made in Adele's presentation, that some of this is about investing in the infrastructure, and some of this is about investing in people who can talk to parents, work with parents and children, and not just leave them to, not just assume that if you build the right stuff that kids and their parents will go there and play. And I'd just like to read out what Adele has said. So this is her experience in Bradford. We prepare by having hand washing facilities, especially after muddy activities, but before eating. Some of our parents were concerned about how it would look if their children were dirty in public. We've slowly managed to change perceptions, and now parents advocate for playing in sand and mud, and they understand the benefits of grounding, tactile immunity, etc. So that's really encouraging that it can be done. Really good to hear. There is another cultural problem that I think is going to have to be tackled if playing in nature is going to become more mainstream. And that is what places should look like. And I think particularly developers like places to look sort of nice and clean and tidy. And when kids rush around and jump on things, you end up with a broken branch or a muddy bit, or I'm thinking of my local park where there's a patch which kids love and it looks a terrible mess. But fortunately, it's left there. There are sort of half-broken bushes and patches of mud, but it's a fantastic den to play in. But I think about developers who are trying to sell their homes for the highest price they can possibly get. Surely the last thing they want is a bit of broken bush with some kids in it playing around. And I just wonder, how can we help that become a really good part of the marketing rather than something that they don't want? So I think I'm going to go to Andree for this first, if I may.
That's so interesting, Julie, about the aesthetic of play. And as Adam mentioned, some of the original research we did, there were muddy areas and puddles, and it looked a bit scruffy. Uh, that is slowly changing. And, one of the things that has helped is this transition from um, landscape as a kind of amenity, very manicured, to landscape for biodiversity. So probably 10 years ago, if we asked people what they wanted in their local parks, they would say we want a slide and a swing and all of the things they recognized from their environment. And we would be saying, what about some trees and shrubs and some wonderful places to roll down hills? And that was quite a difficult conversation because, parents were saying exactly this. Yeah, what about looking after it? It's going to look scruffy and our children will be getting muddy. But since this whole evolution of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis has become very mainstream, people are now saying to us, we know nature's important. The pandemic kind of cemented that in everybody's minds. Oh yeah, nature's good for us. So that conversation now is a lot easier. And parents and families say, of course we want nature and trees. We know, we love it. We understand that it's important. So that is changing. And I think it's partly slowly, such a sort of incremental change. And then I think when we are looking for example, where we're doing work with developers, it's about carefully designing what you put where. Of course, there are opportunities for real kind of wilderness areas, building camps in woods and all those sorts of things, but they might perhaps be located in a location that's not, on the village green. That might be a little bit more organized, a little bit more decorative, perhaps with planting. So it's about good design and what you do where, and understanding what's resilient and what isn't, and helping people understand that nature play is a bit messy. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Adele is just adding something which I'll read out on her behalf. Broken play equipment can be more costly than natural features to repair and replace. Children will spend some time on prescriptive play, such as swings and slides, but will spend hours making dens in rhododendron bushes or mixing potions, etc. And these cost so much less. A really helpful point there. Somebody's also raised the question of cars, and I feel that is a whole other webinar that I hope we'll be able to embark on soon. And there's a lot of really useful links in the chat, so do have a look in the chat and the Q&A. There's plenty going on there. A question perhaps for anyone who'd like to answer this is around schools, around insurance. If children have accidents, is there an insurance risk? We live in an increasingly litigious society, and people's sometimes parents appear to feel that if their child has an accident, that that's not a natural part of growing up if it's a minor accident, but is something that where somebody ought to be sued or it's a problem. So how do you deal with this? Do you get questioned about from councils, for instance, about the possibility of being sued if children fall off something? And how do you answer that? Andree, would you like to take that?
Yes, so when we're designing in the public realm, all of our play spaces have to comply with the regulations, which is what Adele was saying in her presentation. That's BSEN 1177 and 1176 ingrained on our minds, and they are inspected at the end when they've been constructed. Even if they're full of natural elements, you still find that you can work with play inspectors who understand what you're trying to do and reassure the client that it's appropriately safe and that there are no unforeseen risks. That's really what we're trying to eliminate. And then they will write a report that goes to your client, and that demonstrates that your client has been gone through all of the right processes to deliver a safe play space. And if there are any accidents, which of course there are in play spaces, not as many as you might imagine, the client has a robust paper trail to explain what they're doing and why. So that's really important.
Great, thank you. And William has posted in the chat that what we should also remember is the toxic indoor environment, which I think it's very easy for us all to forget, perhaps because it's a bit scary. But the indoors has many more toxins from volatile organic compounds and other pollutants, and that has more impact because we're indoors for 90% of the time. So yes, it's interesting, isn't it, how we focus on some risks and we completely ignore others. I suppose that's a part of human nature, isn't it? Thank you. So we're coming towards the end of today's webinar. I feel like this really is the beginning of a conversation. William's evidence at the beginning about the enormous impact that playing outside has on positive childhood development, both physical and mental, just seems so important given the health problems that we keep reading about among children and young people. So I really hope that today's event is just the start of further conversations and further sharing of good practice and stimulating questions, but also some answers. And we've had lots of links to examples of things that have worked successfully. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers and our audience for being so engaged and interesting. Could we have the final slides, please? So in case you're also interested in this, we have another webinar coming up, which you might be interested in, around public health and local authorities. And around the country, we're discovering and encouraging many councils to have people employed who have both a planning and a public health hat on and understand both disciplines and can communicate between the disciplines. And councils are finding that having somebody in that role can be incredibly useful and very relevant for today's conversation, helping planners understand the public health benefits and the health benefits to children if they're able to get outside is a really good example of how this can work. So if you're interested, we have a webinar coming up about those public health and planning roles that are increasingly being found in councils. Next slide, please. And so finally, I'd like to encourage you all to join the TCPA. The TCPA is a charity. We rely on membership and our projects to generate funding for our work. If you join, you receive the TCPA's journal 6 times a year, and we'll get invitations to events and money off some of our conferences and things. So we really would encourage you to join. It also helps, the more members we have, the more engaged we can show people are. It really helps our policy influencing to demonstrate that there are people who support the things that we are seeking to achieve. So that's the advert from me. My final comment is just to thank our speakers who have put together some really fascinating presentations. This seems so topical and so important that I hope it's a subject that the TCPA can return to in future. And huge apologies that Adele's presentation wasn't able to be accompanied by Adele's voice, but Adele, thank you very much for posting comments in the chat and answering some questions there. And my colleague Gemma has just posted a link to the TCPA's resources about children, young people and the built environment, so do take a look. So thank you all very much, and we hope to see you all at a future TCPA webinar.